Inside me, what are you talking about? Curious alien girl reacts, HFY sci-fi adventure. It was a quiet day in the midst of the galaxy's uncharted expanse, a stretch of space where few dared to venture. In the far reaches of this silent, unknown void, a ship drifted, its engines barely humming as it cruised through the cosmic sea. This was no ordinary vessel, though. It wasn't piloted by any species that humans had ever encountered, nor did it belong to any recognizable galactic government. Inside this ship, nestled in the center of a chamber, was a curious alien girl named Zinka. Her people, the Orlans, had evolved in a manner quite different from most known life forms. She could tap into the essence of a planet's atmosphere, shifting the very air to her will. But what intrigued Zinka the most was humans. She had heard whispers about them from travelers and traders who spoke in hushed tones about their unique qualities. "What are you talking about?" Zinka muttered to herself, staring at the screen before her. The human representative had just sent a transmission. Her long, shimmering silver hair floated around her face in the low gravity. Her deep violet eyes narrowed in concentration. She had been studying human behavior for months, fascinated by their strange, chaotic ways. But one phrase kept repeating in the message: humans are a force to be reckoned with. Zinka tapped her chin with one long, slender finger, pondering the words, a force to be reckoned with? What does that even mean? She leaned closer to the screen. How can humans be a force? They're small, fragile creatures. They're not like us. She had spent years observing civilizations across the galaxy. Most were bound by strict hierarchies, with clear power dynamics. The Orlans had transcended the need for such things, their unity born from understanding and fluid connection. But humans baffled her. Zinka, are you there? The voice of Jara, her fellow researcher, echoed through the room, pulling her out of her reverie. Zinka sighed and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. Yes, Jara, I'm here. Jara's voice came through the comms again. You seem distracted. Is it the humans again? We've analyzed their data, and it's clear they're not like any other species we've encountered. Zinka sat up straighter, her violet eyes burning with curiosity. They are reckless. They fight amongst themselves. They build empires and destroy them in the blink of an eye. And yet, they keep coming back. Why is that, Jara? There was a pause on the other side of the calm. Jara, always the pragmatic one, was silent for a moment before speaking again. You have to understand, Zinka, it's not just about strength or intellect. It's something deeper. They have resilience, an unyielding will to survive. They call it fighting for the future. It's something they believe in. Zinka furrowed her brow. Belief? She had no concept of belief in the same way that humans did. Her people were guided by instinct and reason, not by faith or ideals. What kind of belief could make them so driven? Jara's voice was softer now. It's the human spirit. Zinka, no matter how many times they fall, no matter how hard the universe pushes them down, they get back up. They fight. They adapt. They grow stronger. Zinka's mind raced as she mulled over Jara's words. She had never encountered such a concept, life forms evolving because of adversity. Her species had always sought harmony, not struggle. The thought of thriving through constant conflict was foreign, yet oddly captivating. Her eyes flicked back to the transmission from the human representative. She replayed the message, listening closely to the tone, the passion that seemed to echo behind the words. She replayed it over and over again, trying to grasp the meaning. What is it about them? She murmured again, more to herself than to anyone else. Why do they push forward despite all odds? Suddenly, a thought hit her, sharp as a comet's tail. She had been looking at humans the wrong way. They weren't strong because of their size or their advanced technology. They were strong because of something far more intangible, something Zinka herself was only beginning to understand. A voice interrupted her thoughts, this time. It was from a human on the transmission, someone with a smile in their voice. Zinka, I know you're out there. You want to know what makes humans tick, don't you? I'll tell you. It's simple. We never give up. Zinka's eyes widened. Never give up. The transmission ended with those words echoing in her mind. Zinka floated silently in her chair, processing. Her curiosity had shifted. Her perspective broadened. The Orlans, with all their power and unity, had never been forced to confront a philosophy like the one she had just encountered. This never-give-up mindset was new to her, something alien, and yet, profoundly human. She took a deep breath, her mind humming with excitement. Perhaps, she thought, humans aren't just a force to be reckoned with. Perhaps they are a force to be learned from. The stars outside her window flickered as her ship continued to drift through the endless sea of space. She wasn't sure what would come next, but one thing was certain, her journey had just begun. As Zinka set her ship on a new course, her heart raced with anticipation. The universe had countless mysteries left to reveal, and now, she was ready to face them. Because, like humans, she had learned one thing: never give up. Inside me, what are you talking about? Curious alien girl reacts. HFY Sci-Fi adventure continued. The ship hummed gently as Zinka adjusted the navigational controls, setting her course for a planet known for its chaotic, unpredictable human settlements. There, she could observe firsthand what made humans tick. As the transmission had put it, she needed to see their resilience up close, to understand the depths of their stubborn will to survive. Jara, Zinka called into the comms, her voice reflecting a new sense of resolve. Prepare a data stream for analysis. I want everything we can find on human colonies, how they organize themselves, how they adapt, everything. There was a brief pause before Jara responded. You're sure about this, Zinka? I mean, they're unpredictable at best, and some of their ways, well, they're not exactly harmonious. Zinka nodded, though Jara couldn't see her. I know, Jara, but I need to understand them. The more I learn, the more I see that there's something in their core, something I can't explain, something worth studying. With that, she let her fingers dance over the controls, initiating a series of quantum jumps that would take her deep into the heart of human space. Several days later, Zinka's ship came out of a final jump, appearing over the human colony planet known as Terralon. The planet was a thriving hub, its surface dotted with cities and settlements that seemed chaotic but, somehow, ordered in their chaos. From her observation window, Zinka saw large cities spread out like sprawling webs, connecting different regions with roads and railways. The planet wasn't anything spectacular in the grand scheme of the galaxy. It had no particularly rare resources, no breathtaking natural wonders, but it was alive, brimming with human activity. Zinka's violet eyes scanned the bustling surface below, her mind eager to dive deeper. She activated the ship's stealth mode, ensuring her presence went unnoticed. She wanted to observe, not interfere, at least not yet. Landing near one of the smaller, less populated areas, she disembarked, her heart racing with anticipation. Her first encounter was with a human woman struggling to repair a broken-down transport pod. The woman was covered in dirt, her clothes torn, sweat dripping from her brow. Zinka hovered nearby, watching with keen interest. The woman grunted in frustration and slammed her fist against the pod's engine, only to jump back as a burst of sparks flew from the engine's housing. Without missing a beat, she grabbed a wrench and tried again. Zinka's eyes widened as she observed the woman's persistence. Every failure seemed to fuel her determination even further. Most species would have given up after the third or fourth attempt, but not this human. She wasn't simply trying to fix a machine, she was fighting with it, pushing against the obstacles in her way, as if the act of persistence itself held some kind of value. Finally, with a triumphant cry, the engine sputtered to life. The woman leaned against the pod, panting but smiling. Zinka floated closer, her curiosity overpowering her caution. That was impressive, Zinka remarked, her voice soft but clear. The woman jumped, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon at her side before she saw Zinka hovering just out of reach. Who are you? The woman demanded, clearly startled. Zinka didn't want to appear threatening, so she gently levitated downward, her body floating in a calm, almost serene way. I'm just someone observing. I'm curious about humans. The woman raised an eyebrow. Curious about humans? What, like a scientist? You look kinda different. You're not human, are you? Zinka smiled softly. No, I'm not human. I'm from a distant part of the galaxy. My people are more peaceful, I suppose, but I've been studying your species, your spirit, if you will. The woman took a step back, clearly intrigued but cautious. Spirit, huh? Well, I can tell you one thing about humans, we don't give up. Doesn't matter if it's fixing a transport pod or surviving a war. We'll keep fighting. We've got grit, you know? Zinka's eyes glowed brighter as the woman spoke, a spark of understanding lighting within her. Grit. The woman's smile widened. Yeah, when you're knocked down, you get back up. It's just what we do. Zinka couldn't help but feel a wave of awe. This was exactly what she had been trying to understand. This human woman wasn't just surviving. She was thriving in the face of adversity. She wasn't relying on some higher power or special skill, but rather on an internal fire that wouldn't let her quit. I think, Zinka said slowly, that I understand now. It's not just about surviving. It's about pushing forward, even when everything seems impossible. The woman gave a slight shrug, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. Yeah, that's pretty much the human way, but you can't really understand it until you've lived it. Zinka nodded. She could see now how human culture was built on this principle. Their ability to face challenge head-on, no matter how many times they fell, made them unlike any other species she had encountered. They fought for their future, for their families, for their ideals, sometimes without even knowing why. I think I have much to learn from you, Zinka said, her voice filled with quiet respect. The woman looked at her with a sly smile. Well, if you really want to learn about humans, you might want to stick around a little longer. We've got a lot to teach, if you've got the guts to keep up. Zinka's heart swelled with newfound excitement. I think I do. And so, Zinka set out on her first true adventure among humans, eager to witness their resilience, their creativity, and their spirit. She knew now that there was much more to discover. The human fire was something she hadn't understood before, but it was something she couldn't ignore now. As she followed the woman into the heart of Terralon's bustling city, Zinka realized that her journey wasn't just about observing a strange species. It was about understanding what made them so enduring, so unyielding, and perhaps, just maybe, learning to be a little more like them, because in the end, the best way to learn about humans might just be to become a part of their fight. Inside me, what are you talking about? Curious alien girl reacts. HFY Sci-Fi adventure continued. Zinka's days on Terralon began to blur together as she immersed herself in the pulse of human life. She traveled with the woman, whose name was Lyra, through the bustling cities and barren wastelands alike. Everywhere they went, Zinka saw something new, something extraordinary, yet simple. One day, they arrived at a settlement on the outskirts of a vast desert. It was a place where humanity had carved life out of dust and heat, establishing a thriving community that had once been thought impossible in such an unforgiving environment. The buildings were made of compacted stone, standing strong against the relentless winds that swept across the desert. What are we doing here? Zinka asked as she floated alongside Lyra, who was carrying a small pack filled with equipment. Lyra grinned. We're here for a challenge. You see, every few months, this community organizes a race across the desert. The goal is simple: get from one end of the desert to the other in under 24 hours. It's not about winning, it's about surviving. The desert is unforgiving, and it tests you in ways you can't imagine. Zinka's eyes widened. A race? But the desert, it's so hostile. How can anyone survive such a thing? Lyra chuckled. You'll see, humans love a challenge. The desert may be ruthless, but it's nothing compared to the obstacles we've already faced. They arrived at the start line, where dozens of humans stood, preparing for the race. Each of them looked nervous but determined, adjusting their gear and checking their supplies. Zinka watched them with rapt attention, trying to understand what made them so willing to face such a dangerous challenge. The race isn't about the destination, Zinka, Lyra explained, noticing her curious gaze. It's about the journey. We don't know what's going to happen out there, but we do it anyway. We trust ourselves, and we trust each other. The horn sounded, and the race began. The participants sprinted off, disappearing into the vast, sun-scorched landscape, with only the distant hills offering any sort of relief. Zinka floated above them, observing with intense focus. Hours passed, and the desert took its toll on the racers. The heat was oppressive, the winds brutal. Zinka watched as one by one, some racers faltered, their bodies giving out from the strain. Some turned back, while others pushed on, faces determined despite the exhaustion. Lyra was among those who kept moving forward, her stride unwavering as she weaved between the obstacles the desert had laid before them. Zinka couldn't help but marvel at the humans' endurance. Where most species would have given up, these individuals seemed to thrive in the face of adversity. Every misstep, every struggle, only fueled their drive to continue. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the sand, Zinka noticed something even more intriguing. In the distance, a small group of racers had fallen behind the rest, trapped by a sudden sandstorm. Their communication devices had gone silent, and they had no choice but to rely on their instincts and each other to survive. Without hesitation, Lyra veered off course and made her way toward them, Zinka following closely behind. The storm was fierce, the wind howling as sand stung their skin. But Lyra didn't flinch. She shouted over the storm to the trapped group. "You all right?" Lyra's voice cut through the gale. One of the racers, a man with a tattered jacket, looked up, eyes squinting against the sand. "We're stuck." The storm came out of nowhere. Lyra nodded, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "We'll get you out of here. Stick with us." Zinka watched, a mix of admiration and awe swelling in her chest. Lyra didn't hesitate, didn't question whether it was worth the risk. She was simply acting, driven by an instinct to help others, to survive together. Despite the storm's fury, Lyra and the others worked as a team, guiding the stranded racers toward safety. Zinka, still in awe of their persistence, couldn't help but think back to her own people, the Orlans, who were always so focused on individual harmony. She had never seen anything like this. The humans were bound not by their need for personal gain but by a shared will to see others succeed. Even in the most hostile conditions, they would not abandon their own. By the time the storm cleared, the group had made it to safety, though they were all battered and exhausted. Zinka could sense the exhaustion in their bodies, but there was no bitterness, no regret. They had faced the desert and survived. As they stood together, catching their breath, Zinka couldn't help but ask Lyra the question that had been burning inside her. "Why do you do this?" Zinka asked softly. "Why risk everything, knowing the desert might claim you? Why not just live in peace, like we do?" Lyra smiled, her eyes tired but full of conviction. "Because we can. Because if we don't push ourselves, if we don't test our limits, we don't grow. The desert's tough, but it's nothing compared to the challenges we face in life. Every time we overcome something, we get stronger. We don't run from hardship, Zinka, we face it head-on." Zinka felt her heart swell with understanding. She had come to Terralon seeking answers, looking for the source of human resilience. And now, standing in the midst of the desert, she realized that resilience wasn't just a concept. It was the human way, their refusal to be broken, their determination to move forward no matter what. "I see," Zinka whispered. "You don't fight the storm because you're afraid of losing. You fight because you believe you can win. That belief makes you stronger than anything the universe can throw at you." Lyra nodded, looking out over the horizon where the desert met the sky. "Exactly. The storm doesn't matter if we've got each other, and if we've got the will to keep going." Zinka stood there, absorbing everything she had just witnessed. She had learned so much more than she ever expected. Humans were not just a force to be reckoned with, they were a force to be understood, to be admired, and perhaps, one day, to be emulated. As the night settled over the desert and the stars began to shine, Zinka made a silent promise to herself. She would continue her journey, not only to observe but to learn, to become a part of the resilience she had come to respect. Because now, more than ever, Zinka understood, the fight never ends, and that's what makes us stronger. Inside me, what are you talking about? Curious alien girl reacts, HFY Sci-Fi adventure, continued. Zinka's time on Terralon had left her feeling both inspired and humbled. She had come to observe the human species, to study what made them resilient. But she had left with something far more profound, a connection. She could no longer merely watch from the sidelines. She had to participate. The human spirit had become a part of her. But her journey was far from over. After the desert race, Zinka and Lyra spent more time traveling across Terralon, visiting other settlements, witnessing humanity's will to survive in different environments, cities ravaged by storms, forests burnt by wildfires, and mountains carved by the ceaseless grind of time. Everywhere, Zinka saw the same drive, the same refusal to give in to adversity. One evening, as they camped under the stars near a forest ravaged by a recent wildfire, Zinka found herself lost in thought. The flames had long since burned out, but the scars on the land remained, blackened trees, scorched earth. Yet, life was already pushing back. Green shoots sprouted from the charred soil. Small animals crept through the underbrush, and birds circled above, their songs filling the air. "This is what I meant," Lyra said, sitting beside Zinka by the fire. "Humans don't just survive the storm, they rebuild. We take what's been destroyed and make something new out of it." Zinka stared at the flickering flames, her thoughts swirling. But how? How do you do it? Why not just accept what's lost and move on? Lyra smiled softly. "Because we can't accept it. If we stop, we lose. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about recreating the future, no matter how many times the past tries to tear it down." Zinka nodded slowly, her mind racing. She had seen this concept before, but never in such a personal, human way. Humans didn't just fight to survive, they fought to create better futures. Every obstacle they faced, every scar they carried, was turned into fuel for the fire of progress. She thought about her own people, the Orlans, who prided themselves on peace and stability. The Orlans had never had to fight like humans did. They lived in balance with nature, and their society was built on harmony rather than overcoming struggle. But Zinka now saw that there was another way, one that carried its own strength, its own beauty. "What do you do when you feel like you can't go on?" Zinka asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lyra's smile faded slightly, and her eyes grew distant as if recalling something painful. "You keep going. Even when you feel like your body and mind are telling you to stop, you push through. It's not easy. I've lost people I cared about. I've felt the weight of failure pressing down on me. But every time, I've learned something, and that's how you find the strength to keep going." Zinka felt a pang of empathy. She knew that humans had endured more hardship than she could fully comprehend. There was an ancient, raw power in their persistence, a power that wasn't just about individual will, it was about the collective strength of a species that refused to be defeated. "Do you think your people will ever learn this?" Lyra asked after a long pause. Zinka thought for a moment. "I don't know. Our way of life is different, but perhaps there is something, I don't want to say better, but something that could complement our ways, something that could make us stronger." Lyra's eyes softened with understanding. "Maybe that's what makes us all so interesting. We don't have to be the same to understand each other. We can learn from one another." Zinka stared up at the stars, deep in thought. She realized then that she wasn't just studying humanity from a distance anymore. She had become part of their world, learning from their triumphs, their failures, their boundless hope. She had learned that the essence of humanity wasn't just about surviving, it was about adapting, rebuilding, and thriving against all odds. She turned to Lyra, who had already begun packing up their camp. "You were right. It's not just about fighting, it's about changing the world around you, even when the odds are stacked against you." Lyra looked at her, eyes gleaming with something akin to pride. "Glad you're starting to see it. The universe is full of challenges, but the human spirit? It doesn't break, ever." Zinka smiled. "I think I'm beginning to understand why you say that." As weeks passed, Zinka continued to travel with Lyra and the others, visiting more human settlements and learning more about their ways. She became part of their communities, working alongside them in the face of natural disasters, political unrest, and personal losses. Each time, she found herself more and more absorbed by the resilience, creativity, and tenacity that defined the human experience. One day, Zinka stood at the edge of a massive cliff overlooking a valley where a human city had once stood, but now only ruins remained. The city had been devastated by a recent war, its inhabitants scattered, broken. The remnants of the buildings were still smoldering, and the air was thick with the stench of ash and sorrow. Zinka could feel the weight of history in the air. She could sense the pain of the people who had lived there, the lives that had been lost. But what struck her most was the quiet determination that lingered in the valley below. There were people working, digging, building, making something from the wreckage. They weren't giving up. They were rebuilding. As she stood there, gazing down at the sight, something inside her shifted. For the first time, Zinka understood the full scope of what it meant to be human. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about adapting and evolving in response to the challenges life threw at you. It was about constantly reinventing yourself, no matter how many times you were knocked down. Her connection to humanity had deepened in ways she hadn't expected, and now she realized that her journey had taken on a new purpose. She wasn't just studying humans anymore. She was learning from them, becoming part of their fight to forge a better future. Zinka turned back to Lyra, who had joined her at the cliff's edge, her face serious but resolute. "Do you think we'll ever stop rebuilding?" Zinka asked softly. Lyra looked at her, her face reflecting both the exhaustion and the quiet pride that came with a life lived through struggle. "Maybe we will," Lyra replied, "but not today, not as long as we have the will to keep going." And in that moment, Zinka realized something profound. The human spirit wasn't about never being knocked down, it was about what you did after you fell. It was about the drive to rise again, to build again, to change the world around you until you reached the stars. Zinka smiled, feeling the fire of determination stir in her chest. She had learned that lesson well, and she wasn't done yet. Because now, more than ever, Zinka understood, the fight doesn't end, and neither does the will to rebuild. Inside me, what are you talking about? Curious alien girl reacts. HFY Sci-Fi adventure continued. The days passed, and Zinka's transformation deepened. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was becoming a part of the human story, walking beside them in their struggles, sharing in their victories. She had learned the true power of their resilience, their relentless will to rebuild, to grow, and to never stop evolving. But it wasn't just the challenges of survival that fascinated her. It was the intricate, almost paradoxical nature of humanity that both puzzled and awed her. They were warriors and dreamers, builders and destroyers, creators and consumers, and yet, despite their contradictions, they were united by one driving force, the desire to push forward, to build a better tomorrow. One evening, as she sat with Lyra in a small village nestled in the mountains, Zinka finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at her. "Lyra," she began, her voice thoughtful, "how do you choose your path? How do you decide what's worth fighting for?" Lyra sat back, her gaze steady as she considered the question. They were sitting on a stone bench overlooking a tranquil valley. The sky was painted with the colors of sunset, and the air smelled of pine and earth. "That's the hard part," Lyra said after a long pause. "Humans are constantly making decisions, every day. Some are big, some are small, some are right, some are wrong, but we have to decide, you know? You can't just wait for life to choose for you." Zinka looked out over the valley, her violet eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. She had seen humans struggle with their decisions, each one weighing the future with a sense of urgency that she hadn't expected. "There's so much uncertainty," Zinka murmured, "so many paths. How do you know which one is the right one?" Lyra shrugged, her voice soft. "You don't. You never know for sure, but you trust yourself, you trust the people around you, and sometimes, you take the leap even when you can't see where you'll land." Zinka's heart raced at the weight of the words. In her own world, decisions were made with the utmost consideration, always seeking harmony and peace. But humans took risks. They embraced uncertainty, knowing that sometimes, you couldn't wait for the perfect answer to appear. Sometimes, you had to create your own answers. "But doesn't it scare you?" Zinka asked, almost breathless. "The unknown?" Lyra smiled, but there was something deeper in her eyes, something Zinka hadn't noticed before. It wasn't fear, no. It was something else. It was the glimmer of understanding, of acceptance. "It scares all of us," Lyra admitted, "but it's that fear that makes us strong. We don't let it control us. Instead, we use it. We face the unknown because, deep down, we know that if we don't, we'll never grow, we'll never move forward." Zinka fell silent, her thoughts tumbling over one another. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but there was still so much she didn't understand. Humanity's courage, their drive, their willingness to keep going despite the odds, it was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. It was no longer just about survival. It was about growth, about the endless pursuit of self-improvement. The next morning, Zinka and Lyra set off toward a human research facility deep in the mountains. There, a group of scientists had been working on a project that aimed to harness clean energy from the planet's volatile tectonic activity. The project had faced numerous setbacks, with some scientists arguing it was too dangerous, but the team, driven by the belief that they could improve life for future generations, had refused to give up. As they approached the facility, Zinka couldn't help but marvel at the sheer audacity of the endeavor. The researchers were using the very forces that could destroy the planet, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, unstable faults, as the foundation for their energy source. It was dangerous, yes, but it was also brilliant. Zinka turned to Lyra. Are they crazy? She asked, watching the massive generators rising from the ground, surrounded by tremors and shifting earth. Lyra chuckled. Maybe a little, but that's the thing about humans. They don't fear the impossible. They go for it. They see the challenge and think, why not? Zinka observed the scientists at work, watching their interactions with each other. They were meticulous in their approach, but there was also a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Every small discovery, every success, was a victory, and with each failure, they grew stronger, more determined. She watched as a researcher, an older woman with silver hair, worked with a young assistant, calmly explaining a complex calculation. It's not about not failing, the woman said as Zinka passed by, overhearing. It's about failing better. Every mistake we make teaches us something new. That's the beauty of it. Zinka stopped, taken aback. Failing better? The woman looked up, noticing Zinka for the first time. Her eyes sparkled with a knowing look. Yes, we learn from our mistakes. We adapt. We improve. Every failure is just another step toward success. Zinka's heart skipped a beat. She had heard something similar from Lyra, but hearing it from a scientist in this context, someone who was actively working to change the world, gave the words new meaning. That's remarkable, Zinka said quietly. The woman smiled warmly. You've got to take risks. Sometimes you have to break things to make something better. Zinka's thoughts raced as she took in the woman's words. She had seen humans face hardship, but this was different. This wasn't about survival. This was about transformation. Humans didn't just survive their world, they reshaped it. Maybe it's not so different from what we've been doing, Zinka murmured to herself, but the words had an air of finality to them. She wasn't just studying humans anymore. She was seeing her own species through a new lens, one that allowed for the possibility of change. Lyra noticed her contemplation and nudged her gently. What's on your mind? Zinka turned to her, a smile spreading across her face. I think I understand. It's not just about surviving. It's about creating the future, about embracing failure, using it as a tool to push forward, and never letting the world stay the same. Lyra raised an eyebrow. You're starting to sound like a human yourself, Zinka. Zinka laughed softly, the weight of her newfound understanding settling within her. Maybe that's the point, Lyra. Maybe that's the point. The days that followed saw Zinka become more involved with the humans around her, working alongside them to bring about change, not only for herself but for her species as well. She began to understand that survival alone wasn't enough. To truly thrive, to truly make a difference, one had to be willing to fail, to adapt, to learn from every misstep, and above all, to never stop fighting for the future. And so, with each new challenge, Zinka grew stronger. She was no longer just an observer. She was a participant, a student of the most remarkable species in the universe. One day, she would return to her own people and tell them of the human spirit, of its flaws, its brilliance, and its endless potential to transform the world. Because Zinka had finally discovered the truth, the fight is only part of the journey. The true strength lies in the will to change. Inside me, what are you talking about? Curious alien girl reacts. HFY Sci-Fi adventure continued. The months that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and action. Zinka's time on Terralon had shifted her understanding of humanity. She had come to see them not as simple creatures, struggling to survive, but as dynamic beings, constantly pushing boundaries, learning, adapting, and rebuilding. One day, while traveling with Lyra through a bustling human city, Zinka stood in awe of the architectural marvels around her. The skyline was a symphony of glass, steel, and greenery, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Massive solar panels covered entire building surfaces, wind turbines spun high above, and vertical farms blossomed along the streets. What had once been a polluted, chaotic city was now a model of sustainability. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a living, breathing organism that interacted with the planet in a balanced, harmonious way. You know, Zinka began, her voice tinged with wonder, This city wasn't always like this, was it? Lyra grinned. Not at all. It used to be just another concrete jungle, full of traffic, pollution, and overcrowding. But then a group of people decided that enough was enough. They started thinking big. They redesigned the whole system, how they used resources, how they built their homes, how they grew their food. Zinka's mind raced as she took in the city's transformation. How do you get people to agree on something like that? How do you convince everyone to change? It's never easy, Lyra replied, her tone more serious now. At first, people resisted. Change is always hard. Some thought the costs were too high. Others doubted that it would even work. But the people who believed in the vision kept pushing. They fought for what they knew could be a better future, even when others were content with the status quo. Zinka felt a deep respect for the humans she had come to know. They were relentless. But it wasn't just about fighting for victory. It was about believing that things could always get better, and doing everything in their power to make that vision a reality. As they walked through the city, Lyra introduced Zinka to a group of young innovators who were working on new energy solutions. These young minds had grown up in a world that demanded change and had embraced it fully. They were developing energy-efficient technologies, working to harness the power of the ocean's tides, and experimenting with new ways to clean the air and water. I think you'd find their ideas fascinating, Lyra said with a knowing smile. Zinka observed the group closely, her eyes wide with admiration as they discussed their projects. They were so full of enthusiasm, so passionate about their work. They weren't just solving problems, they were creating a future that didn't yet exist, and they were doing it with a fierce determination that Zinka had only seen in the strongest of human beings. They remind me of the researchers I met, Zinka said quietly, referring to the scientists working with volatile tectonic energy, the ones who build the future despite the risk. Lyra nodded, her expression soft. It's the same principle. They're all connected by the belief that the impossible can be made possible. That change doesn't come from playing it safe, it comes from taking chances, from risking everything for the greater good. Zinka stood in silence, watching the young innovators talk excitedly about their latest breakthroughs. She thought about the human spirit, the relentless drive to improve, to create, and to fight for a better future. It was something that transcended the individual. It was a collective force, one that could bring about miracles. As they left the city, Zinka's mind continued to race. She had come to Terralon to learn, to understand. But now, she realized, she was ready to do more. She wasn't just absorbing knowledge. She was starting to think like them, to feel like them, to embrace that same drive, that same determination to create and build, no matter the obstacles in the way. Several weeks later, Zinka found herself standing at the edge of a great forest, the trees towering above her. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest had once been home to an ancient civilization of humans, now long forgotten, their ruins buried deep within the woods. Zinka had come here to see something that would solidify her understanding of humanity's tenacity. Lyra had told her that this place, once destroyed by a natural disaster, had been reclaimed over generations. It had taken years of effort, years of people working together, rebuilding, restoring what had been lost. As Zinka entered the forest, she could see signs of that rebirth. Young saplings had sprouted where once there had been nothing but charred earth. The sound of running water echoed through the trees. Where a river had once been choked by debris, wildlife had returned, and in the distance, she could hear the hum of human settlement, people who had made this place their home once again. It's incredible, Zinka whispered, her voice full of reverence. Lyra, walking beside her, smiled. It is. It's a reminder that no matter how many times the world is destroyed, there are always people who will fight to restore it. Humans don't just let things break. They fix them. They rebuild. Zinka's heart swelled as she took in the sight. It wasn't just the forest that had been restored, it was a spirit. The human spirit that refused to be vanquished. That turned tragedy into triumph. They stopped at the site of an old temple, its ruins now being carefully preserved by the community. This was where it all began, the effort to reclaim what had been lost, to honor the past while building for the future. Zinka marveled at the delicate balance between preserving history and creating something new. I think I understand now, Zinka said quietly. It's not just about surviving. It's about rebirth. Lyra nodded. Exactly. It's about finding a way to move forward. No matter what happens, the world doesn't stop for you, but you don't stop either. Zinka looked at the ruins and then back at the thriving forest around them. You humans are amazing, she said softly. You don't just live in the world, you shape it. Lyra smiled, her eyes filled with pride. That's the secret, Zinka. We don't just live, we make our mark, and we leave something behind for the next generation to build upon. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Zinka found herself more integrated into the human way of life. She began working on projects with Lyra's team, contributing her knowledge from her home planet. The humans had always welcomed her insights, seeing value in her perspective, but Zinka also found that the more she worked with them, the more she understood that their strength wasn't just in their technology or intellect, it was in their shared drive to never stop improving. She had come to Terralon to study humans, but now, she realized, she was learning how to be human herself, not in the sense of mimicking their behavior, but in understanding their heart, their drive, their capacity for change. As Zinka gazed out over the horizon one final time, she understood the profound truth of what Lyra had said all those months ago: the fight never ends, and neither does the will to rebuild. Zinka had learned that humanity's strength didn't lie in their ability to conquer the world, it lay in their ability to change it, to remake it, and to continue fighting for a better tomorrow, no matter how many times the world tried to break them. And now, Zinka was ready to take that lesson home with her. Because Zinka understood now, the universe is a vast, chaotic place, but the human spirit? It's unstoppable.